Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here today. Welcome to Uncertain Forecast, a podcast about climate justice brought to you by the California Center for Ethics and Policy, or CCEP, in the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences here at Cal Poly Pomona. My name is Vanessa Aldez. I'm the Administrative Coordinator for CCEP, and on behalf of the CCEP team, namely Nicole Lambro, Brady Collins, Corey Aragon, and Alex Modva, we're pleased to bring you our fourth and final panel on climate justice. Now, before we start, I'd like to encourage you to visit our website, and we're putting the link in the chat now, where you can sign up for our mailing list and stay in the know about all of our upcoming events. You can also follow us on social media. We've been thrilled to offer you a full lineup of events this spring, and just in case you missed them, we'll drop the links for those in the chat as well. And while you're at it, don't forget to catch up on season 1 of CCEP's podcast, Securing Justice, which focused on California housing insecurity, and that you can find anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Today's panel is titled Soil, Food, and Justice, the Ecosystems of California. Our moderator is Nicole Lambro, lecturer in urban planning here at Cal Poly Pomona and PhD candidate at UCLA's Luskin School of Public Affairs. Nicole is an architect, urban designer, and researcher who has worked at the intersection of built environment and climate justice for close to 2 decades. She is the executive director of the nonprofit Tinkercraft Design and Advocacy Group, which works exclusively with under-resourced communities to address climate and environmental risks. And her current research looks at how exposure, social vulnerability, and adaptive capacity of populations facing wildfire risk in California are assessed. Without further ado, let me hand the virtual mic over to Nicole.
Thank you for the introduction, Vanessa, and thank you to our audience and our panelists for being with us today to have an open discussion on the important topic of soil. So I'm just going to spend a minute or so just framing this, and then I'll start with my introductions. Soil is, of course, the foundation of so much of our material and social life. It helps to moderate the carbon cycle at the more kind of global scale, but locally it also serves as the foundation for vegetation, for food. And because of that, it really holds value and meaning for different populations worldwide. And it also holds much of the toxicity that makes access to healthy environments difficult for communities that are historically disinvested from. And of course, food systems and soil are political in that they share a history connected to both injustice and liberation. So the USDA, for example, has historically enacted discriminatory policies that have suppressed farming for minority populations. Soil and the food systems that it serves as the foundation for are therefore vehicles through which to achieve autonomy, political education, and to establish a relationship with the land that we inhabit. So with this broad framing to think through some of the work from our panelists today, I want to turn our attention to a very important member in our audience here. I have the immense pleasure of introducing Cal Poly Pomona's newly appointed provost, Dr. Jennifer Brown, who will provide opening remarks for our discussion today. Dr. Brown has demonstrated a commitment to student, faculty, and staff success throughout her career. Thank you. Brings to this important position an impressive record of leading innovations in teaching and learning, focus on access, equity, and inclusive excellence, and significant experience in interdisciplinary research and scholarship. Prior to Cal Poly Pomona, Dr. Brown served as Vice Provost and Dean for Undergraduate Education and Professor at UC Riverside School of Public Policy, and as Vice Provost, Dean, and Associate Dean of the Graduate School at Oregon State. Dr. Brown's applied research program in sustainability and the specialty crop industry has been recognized nationally, and we are absolutely thrilled to have her with us today at CPP's California Center for Ethics and Policy to open our session today. Dr. Brown, thank you for being here, and I'll hand things off to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. This is such an impressive organization, center, and just what you're doing and the topics that you're creating are so important. So, I'll start off by first saying good afternoon to our virtual audience. And I want to share that I'm elated to be here today for the virtual panel. What an impressive topic, soil, food, and justice in the ecosystems of California. And as I prepared for my remarks today, I thought about what is happening at the CCEP and its connection to our campus, our community, California, the nation, globally. As I was looking through some of the talking points and just thinking about what's on the website, I want to share some of the things that stood out to me and kind of share what it means to me. So first, fostering engaged and informed dialogues concerning ethics and policy challenges where California has the opportunity to exercise national or global leadership. Helping California and other regions identify and implement, I highlighted this part, reasoned evidence-based solutions to those common challenges. Creating panels on climate justice and turning this work into podcast episodes. I wish I could tell you this quick story about my daughter in National History Day. She did the podcast. So I have a fondness for podcasts right now. And she's going through the state competition for National History Day. I wasn't supposed to say that. I just that was impromptu. The fact that other ethics and policy podcast episodes are created by CPP students. And the fact that there's a student ethics and policy fellow program, right, along with the CCEP faculty fellows, and thinking about the theme of housing crisis and housing insecurity in California. So when I thought about the importance of what is being discussed today, I think the idea of creating this ecosystem where students and faculty can contribute to these important issues is just another way in which Cal Poly Pomona is excelling and learning by doing, and the Polytechnic experience. When I think about how this fits into my background and what these topics means to me, I want to share a couple of things. So first, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I attended a technical career prep high school. If I had kind of fly through the higher education piece, bachelor's degree at University of Illinois in horticulture, master's at the University of Illinois, looking at retail nurseries and garden centers and merging two disciplines, horticulture and agribusiness, and thinking about, how to keep folks, our small farmers, competitive. But then Michigan State is where, I combined business and thought about consumer behavior and marketing and entrepreneurship and, really thinking about what are attributes that would help keep small businesses, specialty crop farmers in business. When I think about that time and then transitioning over to Purdue to be a faculty member, some of the things that I think about are growing up on the south side of Chicago. I didn't grow up seeing and understanding the effects of people's actions on the environment, but I certainly understood it the more I became ingrained in my academic career, right? So when I think about being faculty, with an extension appointment and the privilege and ability to go out and see and engage with farmers firsthand, with specialty crop producers, with agritourism operations, with farmers markets, to understand their challenges, their opportunities, and their love for just being able to provide to their city, their region, nationally, and thinking about the dean's tours where we would go for 2 days and talk with folks who were embedded in extension and those farmers who the extension agents served. That was really important to us because it allowed us to see the immediate impact that our work, our applied research had on the state of Indiana at that time. And then when I became engaged with the National Ag Statistics Service and gained a knowledge, a holistic knowledge of what's happening in the country and how it impacts, regional, national, and global food supply chains. It just was, it was liberating, it was exciting, and I wanted to dive more into it. So this enabled me to have a holistic view, a greater awareness of the importance of agriculture to feeding the nation and the world, the interconnected nature of climate on our ability to accomplish food production, and the importance of being a good steward of our land and the environment. So how we produce food, how we engage and become good stewards of the land and its resources connected in new and different ways. It's something that perhaps not everyone grows up thinking about, but once you get that spark and you understand the connectivity, I think it's, at least for me, it just grew my intensity in terms of wanting to understand more. I'm going to throw in also a short story about the impact of the pandemic and why this is even more important. So last year, I was a fifth grade teacher by night and administrator by day. And as I was helping my daughter with a project that she had at school, I remember talking with her about a science lesson where she had to learn about evolution of tillage systems and why it was important for farmers to understand crop rotation and its impact and effect on soil health. We talked about also the Dust Bowls at one point and the effect of droughts on crop production. And I watched her light up with questions, connecting the dots, what she already knew on these topics, adding new knowledge about how we are all interconnected, how our actions matter and how it impacts society. And I secretly wish that someone would have discussed these items with me at such a young age. When I get back to what, this panel and the series of podcasts are about, as creators and disseminators of new and existing knowledge focused on evidence and facts, it's important to share this data, the various viewpoints and opinions on what we've learned in our pursuit of knowledge. And the public needs unbiased information so they can come to their own conclusions of what can be done and how they want to contribute or not. I think the or not is really important, right? It's the choice. But this first step is awareness. And that goes back to what is being done today. And without showcasing or highlighting key issues as they emerge and develop, we become lost as a society. So although we're living in a world with competing interests, so for example, folks who are concerned with everyday issues like where will I live as rent and housing prices are increasing. And I saw that real time. My daughter's Spanish tutor, shared with me today. Well, it wasn't today, it was 2 days ago, that she has to move. And this isn't the first time I've seen this happen, right? Folks are dealing with real issues. And so they may not always have the time and bandwidth to process what is being discussed today, but that doesn't mean that we stop sharing and providing an outlet because this information needs to be shared and available for all to access. So I want to congratulate and thank those who had a hand in putting this together. I commend the ethics and policy fellows for their interest and dedication to this work. And I also want to commend our faculty fellows. They are owed gratitude as well. I want to reiterate my excitement to hear the panel today, to share my excitement in joining Cal Poly Pomona, and I'm humbled and elated to serve as your provost and vice president for academic affairs. I really look forward to getting out to meet folks on campus, to get to know faculty and staff and our students, and learn more about research and creative activities, especially what is happening within the CCEP. So I want to thank you for just giving me an opportunity to understand, to learn, to listen, and hear the great things that are happening. And congratulations for all who have put this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for kicking this event off. And thank you for sharing some of your personal history and connection to this topic and to larger issues around soil, food, and how the important question of awareness and who has access to knowledge, but also how knowledge is developed and co-developed. We really appreciate your time and having you be part of the center here today and future events, but also really the larger Cal Poly Pomona community. So thank you for being here. I want to now turn to our panelists, and I'll start things off with Kirsten Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz is an urban ecologist working at the interface of environment, equity, and health. Her research focuses on environmental hazards and amenities in cities and how their distribution impacts minoritized communities. Her work on lead-contaminated soils documents how biogeophysical and social variables relate to the spatial patterning of soil lead. Her research on urban tree canopy has revealed large-scale patterns related to income and tree canopy, as well as historical legacies that impact this relationship. Most recently, Dr. Schwartz led an interdisciplinary team working on a community-engaged green infrastructure design that integrated participatory design and place-based solutions to realizing desired ecosystem services. Her expertise in science communication and engaging communities in the co-production of science was recognized by the American Association of the Advancement of Science, naming her a fellow in the Leshner Leadership Institute in the Center for Public Engagement with Science and Technology. Dr. Schwartz's research has been funded by the National Science Foundation and the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources. She holds a BA in Human Ecology from College of the Atlantic and a PhD in Ecology from Rutgers. Kirsten, thank you so much for being with us today, and I'll turn things over to you now.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. Thanks for that kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to join you all this afternoon to talk about soil. So I'm going to pull up my slides there. Hopefully you all can see. Great. So again, thanks for the invitation. Thanks to those that organized this event this afternoon, to the fellow panelists, and to all of you at home or at work, wherever you're joining us from, joining this virtual panel this afternoon, taking the time out of your busy lives to listen in. I wanted to start out echoing some of the sentiments that Nicole already shared, and that is soil is life, right? Every aspect of our lives is connected and dependent on soil systems, from the food we eat to the clothes we wear, the homes we live in, air we breathe, water we drink. It all comes back to soil. And in a changing world, soil is an important ally, sequestering carbon and slowing the impact of climate change. But soils can also become degraded and polluted, diminishing their capacity to deliver critical ecosystem services, including food production. So the work I'm going to be focusing on today is my work on soil lead. Lead is an important soil contaminant. And although lead naturally occurs in soil systems at really low levels, we've significantly increased in some areas the amount of lead in soil through our past use of lead-based paint, leaded fuel, and industrial sources, industrial processes such as lead smelting. And once that lead makes its way into soil systems, it can stay there for a really long time. And it can make its way then into people when we accidentally eat lead contaminated soil or if we breathe it in. And lead exposure in children, as many I'm sure are aware, is a critical public health concern. Children are especially vulnerable to the effects of lead. Their growing bodies absorb more lead compared to ours, and their frequent hand-to-mouth activity make it more likely that they would be exposed to lead in soil. And lead in soil is also a really important equity and justice concern. Harm is not equally distributed. Black children and low-income children are more likely to have higher amounts of lead in their blood, which is an indicator of lead exposure and lead poisoning. So I've studied lead in soil in several different cities, including Baltimore and Sacramento and Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky. I wanted to share a few highlights of that work this afternoon to reflect on how the legacy that we see of lead in the landscape can impact food futures in our cities. So some of the first research that I did on soil lead was in Baltimore. And my particular interests were in how we can use the design and shape of cities to predict how much lead is in the soil. Right. So in other words, are there features in the urban landscape that we can use to predict where soil lead concentrations might be higher? So if we look at this air photo, are there features within this landscape that we're looking at that, again, we could use to predict soil lead concentrations across the city? And that information in turn could be used to inform top priority areas for intervention. So to answer this question, we measured soil lead in people's backyards using this instrument pictured here on the left. It's called XRF, or X-ray fluorescence, and it provides real-time data on soil lead. It allows us to take lots of measurements very quickly, which is really important when you're wanting to capture that pattern of lead in the landscape. So over there on the right, you can see one of the maps that was produced. So this is someone's backyard that participated in the study. Everywhere that you see a circle is where we've made a soil lead measurement. Different colors correspond to the different values of lead. And what we see at this particular property is not uncommon. So everything in green is below 400 parts per million. And that's one of the guidelines set by the US EPA for soil lead concentrations. Every other color, which you can see is concentrated around the foundation of this building, the blue, red, and yellow, exceed that guideline. And this is not an uncommon pattern that we see. I talked about the sources. So you can imagine that an older house that has lead-based paint, you might see this pattern from the lead-based paint. We also have lead dust in the atmosphere that can adhere to the surface of this building and then be rinsed to the foundation by rain. So you can see that elevated lead around the foundation of this building. So again, we were trying to collect this information at lots of different places within Baltimore so that we could find predictable patterns, use those predictable patterns to then scale up to the city to create these predictive maps, which you see over on the right, which say where it is more likely to see the soil lead concentrations above or below that 400 parts per million threshold in this case. And these models are really flexible, so you could change that threshold or guideline based on the goals of your work. So these citywide predictive map that we made are based in the patterns that we found in the data. And that was that housing age and distance to a road and distance to a building are really strong predictors of how much lead you would see in soil. So I wanted to share some of the work that we did in Sacramento. So moving away from Baltimore and now in Sacramento, we had similar questions. We were interested in what are the important predictors of soil lead concentrations. But we also broadened this up in terms of thinking about what are the trade-offs among soil lead and urban food production. Right, so we're thinking about not only what drives the patterning, but what are the potential trade-offs with folks that are growing food in the city. And so to address this question, we expanded the team to include not only biogeophysical scientists, but also social scientists, and worked in partnership with community organizations that were interested in increasing access to fresh food through installing backyard gardens. So our team included Jonathan London there from UC Davis on the left, Bethany Cutts at North Carolina State University, two social scientists, myself and Mary Cadenasso at the end there from UC Davis, both ecologists, and then again, community partners, including Chinook Yisrael from Yisrael Family Farms. So what we learned from that work probably had less to do with soil lead patterns in the landscape, although the patterns were similar to what we found in Baltimore. And more about the importance of understanding not only the biogeophysical legacies and drivers, but the importance of social legacies and social systems as well. So through this work, we learned the story, of the Mandela Garden. The Mandela Garden was a community garden in Sacramento. It had been used as a community garden for decades. So this figure here, panel A, shows Sacramento overall. B is the location of the Mandela Garden. That top panel C, you can see the Mandela Garden at the bottom portion of the photo, and D is what it looks like today. So a site that has changed over time. Again, the garden had been used as this community garden for decades. The land was owned by the city of Sacramento. The city of Sacramento was interested in developing this parcel of land for an affordable housing project. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of resistance among the gardeners who invested in gardening in this space over decades on this proposed housing development. So in response, the city of Sacramento proposed an alternative gardening site. And the gardeners were concerned about the soil quality at the proposed alternative site. And they asked the city if the city had tested the soil. The city in turn then tested the soil at the existing site, at the existing Mandela garden, found elevated lead, and used it as a mechanism to displace those gardeners and move forward with the development project. So this was a really important case, I think, for us to learn about and to emphasize that it's not only the knowledge about the biogeophysical system and the legacy of past land use, but also the legacy of our social systems that are really critical to understanding soil-led dynamics in Sacramento. And in recent work, which I'm not going to be sharing today, but we have more recent work that we've been doing in soil in LA in collaboration with Tree People. We've done a series of focus groups, and we've heard that land tenure, right, is a critical issue related to food production in cities. So as part of this work, we also conducted semi-structured interviews with urban gardeners. And we learned a lot about soil systems, but also food systems in Sacramento. And one of the key lessons was that there's not one unified food movement in Sacramento, right? Through these semi-structured interviews, we started to identify these 3 taproots that we called them of urban agriculture projects. The idea that some projects are rooted in justice, motivated by justice concerns, some are health, and some are market. And they all exist within the soil system in this analogy that includes structural inequities. So why we thought it was important to identify these categories is understanding how a project is rooted allows us to understand how those projects interact with that system of structural inequities. So different rooted projects interact in ways that can resist, transform, or reproduce those inequities in the conventional food system. So specifically, a adjusted rooted urban agriculture project is more likely to resist or transform the system in which it's growing compared to a market rooted urban agriculture project that might be more likely to reproduce those existing inequalities. So unearthing these roots in the soil system also helps us to describe how they're growing with each other in both competitive and symbiotic ways. So some specific examples, if you're familiar with Sacramento, it's branded as the Farm to Fork capital. They have a Farm to Fork Tower Bridge dinner. Last I checked, tickets are $175 a piece. There's perhaps not much alignment in these differently rooted urban agriculture projects to events such as that. But urban agriculture ordinances recently in Sacramento that have been focused on making it legal for people to grow and sell produce to customers directly from their properties and temporary farm stands, you might expect to see more alignment between these differently rooted urban agriculture projects. And just to emphasize again that all of these differently rooted urban agriculture projects are rooted in a system that includes inequities. This is an interviewee sharing the experience of being surveilled while gardening, an experience they called gardening while Black. And their quote here is, "But I think the key environmental concern for me is how people are perceived to be that live here, because the police already think we're all criminals. I know because I've been at the garden at 14th and 44th, and I've been put in handcuffs. Obviously, somebody must have thought I was breaking in, so they called the police, you know, that type of thing. So I've ended up in handcuffs a couple of times, which, you know, hey, I'm a farmer. I mean, if you want to ask, you could have just asked me." One of the other lessons that we've learned from the work in Sacramento, or at least reflected on, is how we kind of frame and talk about this issue. When we first proposed this research project, I think we really proposed it as these competing interests of contamination and food production in cities. And certainly there are important concerns around that. But as we started to learn more about the processes and people's concerns that are growing food in the city, it became increasingly obvious that urban agriculture can be part of the solution, right? That folks that are growing food in the city are the ones that are actively managing soil systems. And they're often actively managing them in ways that would reduce potential exposure to soil lead. So for example, farmers, growers in cities are often using organic matter or fertilizers, adjusting the pH of their soil, or planting cover crops, using mulch. All of these are different ways that you can reduce exposure by reducing the amount of dust that's circulated in the environment, diluting the amount of lead that's in the soil system, or turning the lead into a different form that's less bioaccessible, less accessible if people are exposed to that soil. There's also the social networking and community building that happens in places of urban food production, where they can start to connect and exchange information. So again, it became increasingly obvious that urban agriculture, through the direct management of soil systems and also the social network and community building, could be part of the solution to soil lead in cities. And I think a really important example of a resource that could support healthy soil, one model is the Pure Soil New York City Soil Bank. So this is a soil exchange where folks can have access to clean soil to amend soil systems that they're working in. So conversations with, for example, LA Sanitation, who just put together a healthy soil strategy for the city, are considering programs such as this for models for creating those resources in LA. So I just wanted to emphasize that sustainability efforts, we often don't think about legacies because they're very forward-looking, but the legacy of lead is one that continues to change the land, and gardening, again, through these biogeophysical processes and also social processes, has the power to change that legacy. So from our work, we've learned that soil can be an important and perhaps overlooked source of lead in cities. It is patchy, it is widespread, but it is in some ways also predictable, right? So the sampling and modeling can help us predict where we would expect to see elevated levels of lead in the soil. And again, as long as farmers of color are handcuffed in community garden, racial inequities will remain critical to understanding these environmental systems. I also wanted to reflect on not only what we learned, but how we learned. This idea that these systems can be complex, and again, understanding that complexity might require us thinking about both the biogeophysical and the social system. I think that researchers can deepen their understanding of those processes through community engaged work. And I think we've seen an increasing need for us to move beyond solely describing the problem that we face and focus on the solutions that we can look forward to. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kirsten, for sharing some of your important work with us. Lead in soil is such a prevalent issue, so I really wanted to start with you, and it's particularly so in urban settings. So I really appreciate the recognition that, in a sense, urban ag can be what you refer to as part of the solution, though maybe in the Q&A we can come back to this question of land tenure. That's an issue, especially in LA, that makes access to urban ag perhaps not possible for some. I want to turn now to introduce Anna Hopkins. Anna works at the intersection of food and narrative with a background in theater from NYU Tisch and 10 years in the culinary trade. Hopkins devises immersive engagements considering food systems, present and future, and how they affect the lived experience. Such works have been produced or commissioned by the Guild of Future Architects, ICA San Diego, KCET PBS, UCLA IOES, and so on. In 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and increased rates of food insecurity, Anna co-founded Farm to People, which pays local independent farmers for their regeneratively grown surplus produce and offers that whole food to underserved residents in Los Angeles. Most recently, Hopkins co-scripted Soupy Salty Sonic, a Liquid Wanting, which is an audio theater work inspired by the emerging field of study around blue foods with artist Marina Zerkow. The work premiered as a program offering for the Food X film programming and was recently installed at the EFA Project Space in New York City. Anna is also a writer-performer with the IAMA Theater Company. Anna, what a wonderful background in food and art. Thank you for being here, and I'll now turn things over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's amazing to follow you, Kristen. It was so beautiful to learn more about your work with soil. Although I do have a background in narrative and some other artistic pursuits, I've really been focused on this work with Farm to People and coming at it through the lens of a food maker and someone who's been invested in a kind of farm to fork or farm to table aesthetic, which is sort of the entrance point for Farm to People. So I will share my screen and take you through what this project is with Farm to People. Oops, pardon me. Okay. So Farm to People, as Nicole just said, was conceived during the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll get into a little bit of the problem that we saw exacerbated, but just to set it up, our mission, as Nicole was saying, is to secure local surplus produce, meaning that there is surplus on the farm side before it ever leaves the farm, things that cannot be sold in the ordinary marketplace, from independent, read, small and medium-sized California producers, and to supply underserved communities in Los Angeles County with fresh, whole fruit and vegetables free of cost. So our vision with this project is a more equitable food supply chain. So as Kristen was talking about, this would be kind of a market-rooted solution, which aims at food justice and health as new sort of root systems. So the values that we talk about and operate from start with farm and soil health. So we believe that a healthy local food supply chain begins with a diverse and healthy network of growers. So we work to identify vulnerable or at-risk farm projects, which are often BIPOC owned, women owned, LGBTQ owned, and smaller than a normal large-scale conventional commercial farm operation. Regenerative agriculture is something that's really interesting to talk about. You know, organic farming has a really clear certification process. It requires something like 8 years and some very expensive work on the part of the farms to get themselves to this certification. However, there's a lot that can happen with organic practices, and regenerative is kind of a throwback to some of the earlier farming practices that might have been practiced by smaller indigenous communities or communities before commercial farming techniques really took off, like post-industrialization. So they could include no-till farming, cover cropping, different ways of climate-smart dry farming. And so we really look for farmers that self-identify in this way or have some aspect of certification, but not necessarily all the way to the organic certification. And I'll say that the real economic support piece is really important here because, as we all know, farming is really, really hard. There are a lot of inputs necessary. It's costly. Labor is costly. And so what we often see in the free food market space or the hunger relief market space is that food is acquired by these organizations through gleaning or through collecting things that have come from other secondary marketplaces, or sometimes collecting what can't be sold by the farm, but with little to no benefit economically to the farmer. So our absolute first step always is to raise enough funds to be able to pay a fair wholesale market rate. And very often when we start that conversation, we get back much more in return, more than they would ordinarily just be selling at that point, because they're just looking to move and we've incentivized that action. So it really benefits the farmer first and then out to the community. So another main value is diversity. Variety, as we know, promotes soil health. That includes the types and varieties of food that's being farmed. It can also relate to what's happening on that soil, interactions with livestock, interactions with forestry. And variety is also really important for a healthy community. One word that's become, or phrase that's become kind of a buzzword since the pandemic and since a lot of focus has been on bridging the gaps of inequity is providing culturally appropriate food to diverse communities. And that means really understanding who the constituents are that are receiving the food, really understanding the different needs of the Asian Pacific Islander community versus a Black community versus a Latinx community, what foods are known to them already, what foods they're requesting. And that's actually another way of curbing waste. And so again, we're focused on diversity at both ends, both on the receiving and also on the supply end. And of course, the goal is increased access. So this is where it is a food justice mission. I believe that Professor Brown or Provost Brown was mentioning how the USDA has historically not come from a very equitable lens in how it has promoted farming in the US. And according to a study from 2012 to 2014, 98% of farms, farm ownership in the United States, they were owned by white owners, and also 86% were male. And so we're sort of seeing this shift now where bodies like the USDA or the CDFA in California are really working to undo some of the damage that previous policies have enacted. And so one way we are operating as a community-based organization is just to increase access to both the economic funding on the farm side and battling food apartheid on the receiving side here in LA. So just to reiterate some of the background, this is according to the CDFA. We have an agricultural abundance in this state, even if we struggle with climate concerns and drought. We produce more than 400 commodities. Over a third of the country's vegetables and 2/3 of the country's fruits and nuts are grown here in California. And there's a lot of waste. And some of this waste happens in marketplaces, in restaurants, in large venues, in schools, in the home. But some of this waste occurs actually at the farm when crops and harvests can't be sold. And so just a reminder, there are a lot of inputs and a lot of exacerbating situations with waste when food is involved. This is a sort of frightening reminder of how big a problem it is in the United States. We are one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases, and food waste can be 6% of all global greenhouse gases come from food waste. So just trying to tie those dots a little bit. So this speaks a little bit to our entrance into our work. During the pandemic, we were just seeing unprecedented amounts of waste. And a huge part of it is how the supply chain operates. Large farms have contracts with large venues that get moved by large transportation operations. And when venues and universities closed, this produce had nowhere to go. And so there had to be a way for us to start looking at a piece of this. Our piece was the local piece of this, and trying to identify where is there waste at the farm and how can we get that into the food supply chain. And just to reiterate, we have in Los Angeles an estimated 1 in 5 individuals who's facing food insecurity, even amidst this abundance. So that was just a real wake-up call for us. I think images like this were very familiar in the early pandemic times. I want to pause here and just touch on something that Kristen was talking about with urban agriculture. Part of my personal window into this problem was through working with an urban farm in Los Angeles called Alma Backyard Farms, which has taken over land in West Rancho Dominguez, which is the Compton area, and they have an incredible urban farm program where they not only work to remediate soil, but they're also working with a population of formerly incarcerated individuals on trainings and whatnot. And that farm actually became the site for one of these styles of distributions. And what we realized is that because of the small square footage of an urban farm like Alma Backyard Farms, they weren't able to fulfill their commitment of 250 bags every other week with just what they were growing. So they were making partnerships with other organizations here in Los Angeles, organizations like Food Forward, who operate in the way that I was speaking of before through a glean operation taking from the secondary marketplace. And so that's where we had this aha moment thinking, well, we can increase the value of this. We can focus on first run regeneratively grown products to bolster what's going into these bags if we start speaking directly to the farmers. And so that was our proposed solution. So we're creating a weekly flow. Ultimately, right now we're in a 12-week weekly flow, and we just finished a 6-week pilot version as well. From local at-risk growers through food relief agencies to reach food insecure families. And so just for a quick visual, there are regenerative farm projects all up and down California. We set a cap 400 miles out. That's the cap that the USDA recommends for what is considered local. So that would take us in Los Angeles as far as close to Sacramento. So Fresno and Central Valley. And then one of the big difficulties here is finding aggregation centers so that all of these large scale amounts, these big pallets, can come to a facility where they can safely be stored. This is part of what we would call the cold chain logistics, and then sometimes broken down into smaller units so that they can go out to meal programs, produce box giveaway, food banks, and free markets. And so this is just a little map showing a detail of the farms that we've been working with. These are the most productive counties that have had a lot of small independent farmers who've been reaching out to us or who we've been reaching out to. And this is an example of some of the farms that we've worked with. So one of them has an organic certification. We have others that are doing various forms of no-till, cover cropping, et cetera. So we know that the demand is great and the demand will continue to be great. And I think that it's really interesting to think about this, this very important idea of food sovereignty. And obviously, if the ultimate goal is to have individuals at their site, at their place of living and working, it's important for them ultimately to be able to have both access and control over the means of production of their food. And we're hearing from Kristen one of the real difficulties in getting there is understanding, if the soil is ready to go, the time that it might take to remediate the soil, the cost and expense of it, and of course, this idea of land tenure. So farm to people's solution is really an intermediary step. We're trying to bring more access from the state that has access, from a locale that has access, because we know that it's going to take time to build these systems here in Los Angeles and continue to build upon the ones that exist. So I'll shout out to two of our really great current partners, the Hollywood Food Coalition and Anahuacalmacac, which is an indigenous school group run by a parent organization called Semilla Sociedad. These are two examples of groups that we've been working with this year to further distribute the food so that we can see the food from point of origin all the way to where the access point is for the individual. Working with Hollywood Food Coalition, we've traced, for instance, our pilot at the beginning of the year out to 36 different agencies here in Los Angeles. And so this allows us to really say, we want to support LGBTQ youths, and we can do that through X organization. And I think that this is really important when thinking about how to really tackle the gap and really isolate instances where food apartheid is sort of the most prevalent and really go at building a solution specifically for that community. And in this way, we can also understand what culturally appropriate foods we might need to gather to bring to these groups. So this is an example of our progress. And I think that it's really important to look at this too, because if you put this against numbers of serving sizes or pounds of food provided by gleaning operations or by organizations like the food bank, who are very often providing food insecure individuals with canned and shelf stable items, the pounds are exorbitant. And that's a really important model. And so we do not see ourselves as disrupting that model at all, but rather working with it, because we are really starting again with the farm side and really trying to make sure that it is absolute quality and healthy whole produce, whole fruits and vegetables that's coming here, because so often that's one of the harder things for these meal programs to actually deliver. And the reason that we can do what we're doing right now is that we're pretty much volunteer run. We're totally volunteer led, but we have hired a really wonderful contractor to help us with logistics flow and farm relations. But this just sort of shows that we're doing it. We're doing it the way we say we're doing it. And so thank you so much for letting me present what Farm to People is up to. I hope that there are some conversations more about food sovereignty, food justice, and how the soil fits into all of that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna, for the work that you do and for sharing some of that work with us today. I actually appreciate that you brought the idea of food sovereignty to this discussion as having access and control over the process of food production. And we can hopefully have some time to talk about how that can be achieved, given some of the very real obstacles to that Kirsten articulated so clearly for us. I have the pleasure now of introducing Dr. Erin Fox, our third panelist of the day. Erin, a special thank you for joining us on short notice. Dr. Fox is an associate professor in the Plant Science Department, Huntley College of Agriculture at Cal Poly Pomona. He's an expert in sustainable agriculture with a background in organic farming, pest management, beneficial insects, and cover crops. Much of Dr. Fox's research investigates ecosystem services, the valuable natural processes that benefit humankind, and how to enhance them through sustainable farming practices. At Cal Poly Pomona, Dr. Fox focuses on urban ag in the LA area and around the world. Along with Dr. Eileen Cullen, Dr. Fox created the minor in urban and community agriculture, open to all students at Cal Poly Pomona. This minor is the first academic program of its kind that focuses on the production business policy and community development aspects of urban food systems. He is currently leading a U.S. Department of Agriculture funded urban ag student leadership program called SoCal Farm to Table Ambassadors. Erin received his PhD in crop science and entomology from North Carolina State and his Bachelor of Science from Tulane University. Erin, thank you again for being here, and I'll turn things over to you.
Hi, everybody. It's a real honor to be asked to be on this panel with such amazing speakers. And yes, I will apologize for any lack of eloquence on my part. I was sort of asked to be on the panel a couple of days ago due to some changes. So I've been spending all morning out on a farm, and I thought that I would ask a question, see if, well, let me ask this question and we'll kind of get started on some of the things I was hoping to talk about. Let me share my screen here real quick. So the question is simple. Where do y'all think this is? Where was I this morning? So this is the farm I was on. This is actually a picture from a little while ago, though. But if you wouldn't mind, just put it in the chat box, where you think I am or where you think I was this morning. Geographically. Here's another picture from another angle that might give a couple more clues. Let's see if I can make this go. There we go. I'm loving the answers y'all are giving. I really appreciate that y'all are participating and contributing. And so I'll give you the answer. This is Cal Poly Pomona's campus. This is Spadra Farm. It's about less than a mile from campus. Let me show you real quick. Y'all let me know if you can't see all of my screen and such. Oh. So I guess I'll zoom out real quick just so that y'all have, for those of y'all not familiar with Cal Poly Pomona, we're in eastern Los Angeles County, right before you get into San Bernardino County. So our main campus is here, basically where the 10 and the 57 meet. And then just down the road, go down Temple a little ways, is Spadra Farm. It's about 150 acres. So 150 acres of prime farmland in Los Angeles County. I wanted to kind of start off by talking about that, because what I would like to do in just the little bit of time that I have is try and connect a lot of what we've heard today to specifically what's going on at Cal Poly Pomona. And so in some aspects, I am primarily speaking to Cal Poly Pomona students, but I would also really like to encourage community members in the audience to really think about how this connects to you and to what you're doing, and how we can better connect to you, right? You know, we are a public university, we're a public institution, we're a public resource. Spadra Farm, 150 acres, you know, we've been farming this land for about 80 years now. And of course, like all of this area around us, this is the land that the Tongva, Kizh, Gabrielino, indigenous communities raise their children on, continue to raise their children on, build their communities on for thousands of years. Let me show y'all a photo of some of the soil. I think on some aspects, we've done a really good job of managing this farm, in the sense that, you know, we're able to grow crops, we're able to teach our students, we're able to, you know, continue to have this agricultural resource. You know, if you think about it, when Cal Poly Pomona started, most of LA County looked like those photos that I showed you, right? And a lot has changed. On the other hand, we're not doing a very good job. And I think one very key way of demonstrating that is that most folks that go to Cal Poly Pomona don't even know this farm exists. And I think that's one thing that I'd really like to sort of impart upon you all, again, primarily for, you know, students at Cal Poly Pomona, but of course also for our greater community, is how can we better connect this resource to you? You know, at the very least, come on out, let me show you around. But, you know, we're starting to kind of get folks from engineering, folks from the different colleges to come out, because of course, you know, this farm is the heart and soul of our plant science program in the College of Agriculture, but it's also for all of you as well. So what about the soil? this is taken from today. From soil texture standpoint, we've got really good soil out there. It's floodplain soil. It's really good for growing crops. But for those of y'all that gotten a chance to stick your hand in the soil, take a look at it, you probably can start noticing some things that may be a little bit problematic about this. There's not much structure to it, right? It's kind of dusty looking. And that shows that there's a real lack of life in our soil. And so, there's some real questions here about how have we been managing the soil. And I think it could be argued that we haven't done a very good job of supporting the health of the soil. And I think there's some real questions as to why. And I think this starts to get into some of the structural issues that connect to farms, throughout the country and throughout the world. Cal Poly Pomona's farm is not supported by state funds. We are tasked with generating revenue to support the farm. And so our primary focus, along with education and research, is to produce crops and sell them. And so oftentimes healthy soil practices are seen as an expense. While they may have long-term benefits, they often don't have short-term benefits. And so there's sort of disincentives in our current structure to adopt these beneficial practices that can really help us maintain our soil so that we can continue to farm this land and continue to feed our communities. Similarly, related to some of the issues with food security, food insecurity is a huge issue on our campus. There's some estimates, they did some studies statewide in the Cal State system, and they showed that 40% of our students in the Cal State system are experiencing some level of food insecurity. And the fact that, we have a 150-acre farm on a campus that, has 27,000 students, and we have food insecurity is absurd. But again, this goes back to sort of the current structures of our society and how, we value things and how we commodify things. We are required to produce revenue, and there's this mentality that, we can't give things away. Can we change that? And yes, we absolutely can, but it requires all of us to lean in a little bit. It requires us to work together. And so here at the Lyle Center, the food being produced at the Lyle Center is now going directly to the food pantry on campus. And that goes directly to addressing food insecurity in our student population. Now, how are we able to do that? It's through donations from a donor, and it's also from student fees and through the budget of ASI. And so this is what I mean by, we all need to kind of lean in and advocate and start thinking about how we can do things differently and how we can start doing a better job of taking care of each other. If you're interested in this, please reach out to me. We've got volunteer events at least one Saturday a month. Due to some COVID restrictions, we have to limit how many people can come out. So the April 23rd event is, for lack of a better description, sold out, but please come out on May 7th. And if, those Saturdays don't work, or if you just want to come out in general, there's always volunteer opportunities at the Lyle Center to help with this. And if you're interested in, again, kind of getting more involved in food production on campus in any way, please let me know. Some other things that kind of come to mind, sort of directly related to sort of the our relationship with our greater community. If we look at the area around Cal Poly Pomona, this is a Cal Enviro screen showing pollution burden. We're in a a really intense spot. You know, Pomona is has some of the poorest air quality in the state. And the reason I bring that up is, you know, farms have the ability to improve pollution burdens in communities. They have the opportunity to help improve air quality, et cetera. But are we doing that? And I mean, I think it's a really good question. But again, because we're not necessarily implementing a lot of healthy soil practices like cover crops, et cetera, I think there's a lot of wind pollution. A lot of those soil particles are probably contributing to air pollution in our area. And so again, why is there this disconnect, and what can we do to reconnect? What can we do to make this situation better? Similarly, I was looking at the food desert map, and Spadra Farm is just straight up in a food desert, right? And it really does start raising some questions of like, why is there this disconnect? Why is there this 150-acre farm producing fruits and vegetables in the middle, you know, of a food desert? And again, you know, directly related to our student population. So I encourage you all to connect with me and with others. I'd be happy to connect y'all with others. Last things I'll kind of leave y'all with is, for any students in the room that feel, you know, a little bit powerless, I will do my best to encourage you all to understand that you have great power. Spadra Farm was threatened with development just a few years ago. They were going to put buildings across the entire thing. And it was the students that stopped it. You know, I always joke students didn't know the protocol of sort of the chain of command, et cetera. They found somehow the personal cell phone number for Karen Ross, who is the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of California. Just straight up called Karen Ross and said, "Can you help us?" And so I would encourage students especially, but everyone in the room, to never feel like you're powerless. There's lots of opportunities to get involved and to change things. And I would be remiss not to mention just a couple things that I think are really pertinent to this issue. The development on farmland issue continues to be an issue in our area. There's things going on right now in our neighborhood that I would encourage you all to get involved with. There are planning on building some mega warehouses in Ontario on some prime farmland. There's folks in the room right now that can talk more about this, but please check this out. And then also related to some of the lead issues that were talked about recently, if you haven't gotten a chance to look into the Exide battery plant issue, please look into that. It's a incredibly important environmental justice issue in our broader community, where you know, a disregard for law and disregard for community has just poisoned a lot of soil in East LA, and it looks like no one's going to take responsibility for it. So there's some folks on campus that are working on fighting this as well. I'd recommend you contact Duncan McKee for more information on this. I think with that, I'll close up. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak. This was a really amazing event, and again, an honor to be invited to speak. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I see. I have to admit, I've been at Cal Poly Pomona since 2017, and I did not know this farm existed. So it was wonderful to see, and thanks for sharing that map. Raheem, I see that you have a question. I'm going to get to it in a second. If anyone has any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat box. And I just want to kick things off with just this initial question on the heels of what Aaron was just talking about, which is the Exide plant. So this is for any of you. And Kirsten, in your presentation, you mentioned that housing age is one strong predictor for lead content in soil. And I would imagine that, and I think you touched on this, that proximity to certain land uses would also be a strong predictor. So I was kind of initially involved with some of the research effort in East LA on Exide in particular, where the measurement of lead in soil in a community like Boyle Heights were just many times more the minimum standards set by the EPA that Kirsten mentioned in her presentation. So can any of you maybe speak to that research and, for example, how such issues tie into how achievable this idea of food sovereignty can be in an urban setting like that? And I say that because many of the households in that community that I spoke to in East LA were actually worried about growing food, something that they remember their parents and grandparents doing. That is very much part of this kind of, culture building exercise that they could not participate in anymore because, of the soil contamination. And that knowledge and culture building is lost in a sense. So just wanted to tie that back into this idea of food sovereignty, particularly in urban settings insofar as land use goes, and see if any of you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Erin, thank you for bringing up that really important regional case of Exide. I'll just add, I guess, that certainly historic land use is an important factor when thinking about systems, and I think a really big challenge to food production and food sovereignty. And I'll just, I think, reflect briefly on 2 points. One is work that I did in Northern Kentucky in a neighborhood that was immediately adjacent to a historic smelter. We were interested in this work. I think it was back in 2012. USA Today put out a story called Ghost Factories. And they looked at all of these historic facilities and then looked at the soil systems surrounding them. So we wanted to follow up on that story in this community in particular. And in comparing the results in this neighborhood immediately adjacent to the smelter to nearby Cincinnati with similar kind of development history, we did see that kind of the general level of lead in the neighborhood was higher. Right. So it's sort of layered on top of this idea that you're going to have these hot spots next to buildings, just have kind of general higher blanket contamination from these historic industrial sources. And then the second point I wanted to make is that I sometimes share a picture of the Exide cleanup as an example for why we need really systems level solutions to these things, because the cleanup is done by parcel, right? So you have a neighborhood that has been contaminated, and then this patchwork of remediation. And of course, the contamination is not going to care about parcel boundaries or neighborhood boundaries, political boundaries, right? So we really need different approaches to the cleanup of these systems. And that translates to policy as well. If we think about lead poisoning in general, policies regarding our water infrastructure and our soil systems and housing and development and demolition, like all of these policies need to be better connected in a systems level approach because they all are connected to one another.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. I remember some homeowners around the Exide area that had their front and backyards, they had the soil remediated there. They were telling me that because of the topography of the neighborhood, once it rains, the soil from this parcel goes to the next one, goes to the next one. So it really renders a lot of this effort somewhat meaningless in a sense. Let me turn to Anna for a second. In your work, when we first spoke outside of this forum, I also had this question for you. So in your work with the farmers that you collaborate with, what are some of the challenges that you hear from them that they're talking about? And I had this thought because I've been reading, for example, about how the cost of growing food and other incentives really facilitate farmers in California right now in transitioning their land to the renewable energy market, solar, wind farms, right? So I just wanted to get a sense of what are some of the stresses or perhaps other policy or market-driven, factors that may be forcing a change in their practices.
Yes, Okay, so there are a number of these kind of barriers. One of the reasons that we went out to small and mid-size and independent farmers is that they were often the farmers that couldn't access the first couple rounds of funding through the USDA because they didn't have the scale. And so what happens with the smaller farm projects, there's another kind of buzzword in this world right now, which is food hub. And basically the idea is, there need to be more aggregation centers along the routes, so that along the transit routes, so that smaller farms can actually consolidate some of their goods to get it to market. So that's one barrier, is sort of scale. And then of course it's cost. It's just the cost of being able to certify your practices, being able to really pay for labor and inputs and transitioning. And often you have to be at a certain scale to access certain buckets of funding to help you make those transitions.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you. I have a question in the chat here that I'm actually interested in as well. Came from Alan Chapman and is for you, Aaron. What is the water management scheme at the farm?
It is interesting. So we've transitioned away from a lot of, we've been adopting more efficient irrigation techniques in the past generation. And, honestly, about 40% of California agriculture is still flood irrigated. California agriculture. So we used to have flood irrigation in some of our orange groves. We don't have that anymore. We have sprinkler systems. Well water at Spadra is an interesting issue. There's a legacy of sort of mismanagement there as well, in a sense. The nitrogen levels are really high from previous over-fertilization, so we can't drink it, but we can irrigate our crops with it. So I'm not sure if that addresses the question or not. We're actively involved in, research, and in my sustainable agriculture class, I teach my students how to do, irrigation audits and how to kind of do irrigation budgets and things like that.
Super. And then a follow-up question from our very own Alex. What does flood irrigation mean?
Excellent question. Yes. Sorry to kind of throw out terms without explaining them. So you have a big pipe. You open the big pipe, lots of water comes out, and it floods the field. Now, typically, if you've got a crop growing in there, you don't necessarily want to flood the crop. So your crop is oftentimes, growing in a higher spot, like a row. And so the water is really just sort of in the in between row spaces. This is a really common way to irrigate fields throughout the world. It doesn't require that much infrastructure. It does honestly require a little bit of skill, which, I'll talk to y'all about offline. But as you can imagine, you use a lot more water than you need. And so, moving from sort of that inefficient system to a more efficient system like drip irrigation can save a lot of water. Now, I can talk to y'all about, all the issues with drip irrigation as well. But one thing to consider is that this is a bunch of plastic. The drip tape is a bunch of plastic that we use once and then we throw it in the dumpster. And so, water management and irrigation sustainability is a pretty complex topic.
Great. And then thank you, Aaron. And if you could just drop your email in the chat, there's a ton of people that really, there we go. Thank you. So we have just a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to also pose this. I think this it could be a question for any of you. There's a lot of literature around how, on the one hand, urban ag can, promote food justice, and on the other hand, it can really contradict some of the principles there by increasing gentrification. And I want to put this out there just to also tie what we're talking about here with housing insecurity that Dr. Brown had talked about, and that the previous CCEP fellowship covered. So the kind of line of thinking would be that community gardens can really attract new and more wealthy residents rather than benefiting existing residents. So if you had any kind of thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
I guess just acknowledging that, yeah, it's I think an important issue, one that we heard about in the interviews with growers in Sacramento, that there was concern about how food production in their neighborhood would change other aspects of their neighborhood. We also heard about it in more recent focus groups that we've been doing in LA, and concern over both access and the dialogue around that there's an immediate trade-off between food production and housing availability. And this particular interviewee, I remember sharing like that we're missing kind of solutions that might address and include both.
Exactly.
So a really important point.
This is a little bit of an adjacent offering, but one of the organizations that we learned a lot from and who started to advise when we were entering this space is a group called Crop Swap LA, run by Jemiah Hargens. I don't know if you have come across his model, but it's really cool because he's taking the approach of looking at available land in front and backyards as like pieces of a patchwork, larger scale community share farm operation. And so his plan involves incentivizing the use of someone's home. And I guess what's implied is that you're, communicating with the homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that ideas like that start to get outside of the box and maybe work against the idea of a limited tenure in an area in between it being, a vacant lot and developed a few years later, is an interesting model.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. Yes, Teresa. Last question.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on that. I do, on that question, I do a lot of work with urban agriculture / food justice / food sovereignty activists and community organizations here in the Pomona Valley area. And one of the conversations that we have and I also participate as a member, as a volunteer in several of these organizations. And one of the conversations that we have pretty actively is actually how we can strategize to discourage gentrification. So as community organizations, we are actively disinterested in supporting any kind of efforts within the city of Pomona, for example, that would encourage gentrification. And so I think that one of the ways in which we can do that is through having these conversations with city officials, being open about what the purposes are of these organizations, even actively resisting attracting folks with high incomes to come into the city to use those spaces and places. So we run half of the Pomona Farmers Market, which is one of the oldest farmers markets in the state in Southern California. And we run the chemical-free organic side of the market. And it's done all through volunteer labor. So we essentially subsidize, very similar to what Anna had mentioned, we subsidize local farmers. And we do the same thing. We intentionally support women, BIPOC people, queer farmers, people who don't even have don't have certification. And we bring their produce to the market at a reduced cost because essentially they give us a lower price because we're subsidizing their labor. And then we pass that lower price directly onto the community. So we're not interested in doing all of this work to support higher income individuals from Claremont or Upland or Diamond Bar to come into our community and access this food. So we specifically don't market or advertise in any places that would attract kind of middle or upper middle class individuals. So I think there, these are all sort of, ad hoc strategies that we use, but I think that they're important and useful because as we've seen in the case of Portland, Joshua Spick has written about this quite a bit.
Yeah.
Eco-gentrification is a really big problem. Yeah. And it's something that I think community organizations and activist organizations have to be really attuned to from kind of the get-go with their work. So yeah. Thank you for allowing me to comment that long.
Of course. No, thank you. It's an important topic. This issue of eco-gentrification, green gentrification, all of this. And I think these issues need to be accompanied by larger, policy changes that look at housing security as well. So we're talking about multiple things at once. So we're a little bit over time. Thank you everyone for sticking around. A special thank you to Dr. Brown, to Dr. Schwartz and Anna and Dr. Fox for being here and discussing this important topic with us. Thank you for your amazing work, for sharing it with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Vanessa. There's some closing things that you want to say, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, for being on your best behavior. The recording came out wonderful. This will absolutely get posted as soon as possible. I dropped the link in the chat again for our website and our mailing list so that you can watch it again because it was so good. And there's so many things to learn and soak up. And how could we get it all in one shot? So please visit our website, sign up for our mailing list, follow us on Instagram so that you don't miss any more of these amazing events that we've had. Thank you again to our panelists and to Nicole. Have a wonderful, safe weekend, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone.